Hello and welcome to News Warrior, BharatShakti.in's own video blog. And I'm Nitin Gokhale. As the year 2018 winds down, it's time to look back and see how India has fared in its diplomatic relations and its strategic sphere. There have been some restoration of balance in some relationships. Some relationships have become more uncertain than before, and some others have been strengthened over these last 12 months or so. But let's look at what went wrong for India or is going wrong for India first before we talk about successes and the kind of restoration of balance that has taken place. I think India is in a difficult position, like I mentioned in my previous discussion with you in the previous blog, where we talked about how it's become imperative for India to be thinking on its feet and doing what it needs to do to secure its own national interests, given the fact that all the major powers today are jostling for influence and are at odds with each other. So Russia, the United States, China, all have some tension in the relations that they have between themselves, either multilaterally or bilaterally. And India is in a position where it has to keep a tab and keep a watch on all these relations and not allow one relation to impinge on the other, although there are attempts by all these countries to influence and to pull India into their own folds. So India has truly and really become the swing power, and when I say this, I say it deliberately, because if you look at India's relations with US, they are robust, although they could be better. Given the fact that there is an unpredictable and a maverick president in the White House, India has done well to keep the ties with the United States on an even keel. Although the establishment in Washington would want India to cut off its ties with Russia, India has managed to keep its old defense relationship, at least, with Russia intact. And in fact, India has gone ahead and bought the S-400 missile systems from Russia, despite US objections, and very strong objections at that. Similarly, India has restored its balance with China, notwithstanding the fact that US-China relations have deteriorated over the trade issue. In fact, President Donald Trump has declared a trade war on China, which has made Beijing very uncomfortable, and therefore there are resultant outcomes from that trade war which really favor some countries, including India, where they can find more space and more time on their side, given that the two biggest economies and two biggest nations in terms of comprehensive national power are fighting with each other. So where does India stand in the last 12 months? Let me begin by highlighting two relationships that were restored in the past 12 months, or the balance was restored in that relationship. One is with China. The informal summit at Wuhan between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping has brought the balance back in the India-China relationship after the depth to which the relationship had descended following the 73-day standoff at the tri-junction of India, China and Bhutan borders at Dolam, or Doklam as it is popularly known. The face-off between Indian and People's Liberation Army troops took the relationship to a level where distrust and mistrust was the order of the day between India and China. But thankfully, better sense prevailed last year in 2017, and the face-off was resolved in September last year, following which the two sides reached out to each other. They met halfway and came up with this mechanism called an informal summit between the leaders of the two countries. That summit took place in April at Wuhan in China, and since then the India-China relationship has been restored. The balance has been restored. It has become much more normalized than what it was last year, and yet one must point out that India remains firmly opposed to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Last year in May 2017, you will recall, India had refrained from attending the Belt and Road Summit, which China had done with much fanfare, and India's steadfast opposition to the entire concept of Belt and Road Initiative continues to be the same, and as we understand from recent pronouncements by the government of India, that is, India continues to have suspicion and reservations about the Belt and Road Initiative projects, mainly for two reasons. One, of course, that it impinges on India's sovereignty in the Pak-occupied Kashmir, where some of the projects of the China-Pak Economic Corridor, which forms part of the BRI, pass through. But more than that, India has reservations, and it was articulated for the first time by some of the sources in the government in the past 48 hours, that India thinks that some of these infrastructure projects that are being financed and being implemented by China, like Gwadar or like the roads or the optic fiber network that China is proposing under the Belt and Road Initiative, can be of dual use. That is, they are not just meant for civilian use, but China can use them for military use when the balloon goes up. And India has for the first time articulated that concern, and therefore India remains wary of the Belt and Road Initiative. Also, and this is the other point that India had made in May 2017, that the financing pattern, the rules and regulations that China follows or wants other countries to follow during the Belt and Road Initiative projects are very opaque. They are not in keeping with the internationally accepted norms, and therefore India does not want to follow a new system that China is wanting to impose on other countries. That opposition has been made clear, and that reservation that India has about the Belt and Road Initiative, which many people in India and especially the government has pointed out, that it's not an economic project, but it's a political project where China wants to colonize smaller nations in a garb of economic assistance or economic grants that it gives to smaller nations. So therefore the ties may have been restored, but India remains wary of China on certain counts. The trade deficit, for instance, between India and China continues to balloon, continues to increase in China's favor, and some steps China has apparently taken, but the proof of the pudding always lies in the eating. So therefore we'll have to wait and watch whether that trade deficit can be reduced after more and more commodities from India are allowed. Non-conventional tariff barriers that China has consistently imposed on Indian goods will be lifted in the months to come to reduce that trade deficit which is against India at the moment. That is one part of the major relationship as far as India and China is concerned. At the same time, China is reaching out to India because it is aware that this is the time when it needs to put its head down, given the fact that an aggressive United States is trying to put China under pressure, and it wants India and maybe Japan to be neutral at this time. China may not want India to be its friend, and it knows India cannot be its friend given the rivalry and the strategic competition that the two countries have in Asia. But China wants India to be neutral in that war that is taking place at various levels between India and between China and the United States. Similarly, India has concerns about the lack of progress in the boundary talks. Not that both New Delhi and Beijing are in a hurry to settle the old boundary issue, but India is aware that it is only this country which has a long and contentious border with China, and none of the other countries which are trying to form a kind of anti-China bloc, United States, Australia, Japan, and trying to rope in India, have any territorial boundary dispute with China, and therefore India is charting its own course as far as relationship with China is concerned. Coming to the neighborhood itself, which is another area of contention between India and China, India has managed to restore its balance or restore balance with Nepal, which seemed to be tilting towards China heavily after the election of Prime Minister Oli in Nepal. But that relationship has been brought back on track. India has scored a win, if you want to describe that, in Maldives by getting India-friendly government there, and President Soli, Ibrahim Soli, is seen as somebody who is completely pro-India. In fact, he made his first trip to India, and many other projects have been revived as far as India is concerned in Maldives. A joint military exercise has taken place even as we speak between India and Maldives, and the old bitterness that President Yamin had brought into India-Maldives relationship has vanished for the time being, at least. But as I keep saying in my discussion with you viewers, please keep sending your comments and keep liking this blog. Only then we will be able to take it forward. As I keep saying in this interaction, that there are no permanent victories or permanent defeats in international relations, and that is now very evident in the way things have panned out in Maldives, and the way India kept out of the domestic political turmoil that took place in Sri Lanka recently, where, except making a statement that all parties must adhere to democratic and constitutional norms in Sri Lanka, India kept in touch with all the warring parties in Sri Lanka and has earned a lot of goodwill because of that. That mistake has been corrected in Sri Lanka itself. In Bangladesh, for the first time perhaps in recent memory, India or India's so-called interference or India's management of elections in Bangladesh is not a big topic in Bangladesh for the first time in Bangladesh elections when they take place this Sunday. So that is something that India has now deliberately kept a low profile in the neighborhood. And if you look at India's relations with the ASEAN countries, or India's Act East policy, from look east to act east, is paying dividends wherever you go. As we speak, the Bhutan Prime Minister, the newly elected Bhutanese Prime Minister, is in New Delhi to his first international tour or a foreign tour, and of course that relationship remains most robust and very strong. India is the major partner as far as Bhutan is concerned, and despite China's attempts to undermine that relationship, the two countries have managed to continue to strengthen their diplomatic relationship in the 60th year of establishing that relationship in 1958, and therefore India has managed to keep itself afloat, if that is a term that one can use, because in these uncertain times, keeping your head and keeping your position firm in the face of uncertainties and various combinations and permutations that are emerging in the world of international relations, India has managed to keep afloat, is what I feel. Its relations with the Gulf countries, especially UAE and Saudi Arabia, have remained strong and in fact have strengthened over these 12 months. And of course, when you look further east instead of looking west, India's relationship with Japan is only going a step further, because India is going to sign a logistic support agreement with Japan. Japan itself is also hedging its relations with US as well as China, and therefore to sum up, one must say, except for its frosty relations with Pakistan, India has managed to keep its head above the water although the challenges in 2019 will be quite something different from what India has seen. For one final reason I want to mention is that the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan and the increasing importance that Pakistan and China and Russia are getting, or increasing involvement of these three countries in Afghanistan, is going to leave India with no choice but to accept the fait accompli in Afghanistan, which is not a positive development as far as India is concerned. But except, as I said, its relationship with Pakistan, India has managed to keep a semblance of normalcy as far as major players in the region as well as outside the regions are concerned. And therefore, I think the diplomats and the strategic community, and of course the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister, can pat themselves on the back for having remained firmly in favor of India's own national interest and not giving in to many other pressures that would be there on India in terms of the alliances and terms of the relationships that have developed over the years. What the new year will bring, none of us know, but until we meet again in the new year, here's wishing you a very bright, prosperous and peaceful 2019. Keep sending your comments and keep liking this blog. We will come back with a new topic and a new year in the year 2019. Until then, this is Nitin Gokhale saying goodbye.